Aua wairea teone tapu kāhura tangata auta te tūraki atu ki tangata tai, kāhura tangata tai te tūraki atu ki tangata auta. Pērā hoki rā te kōrepe nui, te kōrepe roa, te wāhia wa te toi toi awa, whakamau wā tamaki te ara, whakamoe tamaki te ara, no tūnorongo, whano haramai te toki, haumie, huie, tai ki e. Mihi ana ki te wā hingaro te tīmatanga me te whakaotinga o ngā mea katoa. Ki te hunga mate, e takoto tīraha mai ana ki ngā marae huri noa I te motu haere atu koutou. O ki mai no ranga rārangi korero kia tātou te hunga ora, nau mai, haere mai, whakatau mai ki tō tātou whare kōrero. Welcome and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Rethinking Screen Time, the Impact of COVID-19 on Children's Learning. My name is Kauti Waitford and it's a pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the team. Today's webinar is hosted by A Better Start, E Tipu Ere National Science Challenge. A Better Start is the National Science Challenge working to help children, teenagers and their whānau achieve the best possible start in life. Its mission is to find practical, evidence-based solutions that make a measurable difference for tamariki, improving the potential for all young New Zealanders to have a healthy weight, good literacy skills and sound mental health. Before we start our webinar, a little housekeeping. Today's webinar is scheduled for 1 hour, including Q&A. All audience members will be automatically muted throughout the session. A recording of today's webinar will be made available to all attendees as well, and there will be a Q&A session at the end of the webinar today. Please submit questions using either the Q&A function or chat function located just at the bottom of your Zoom window. Our chair today is the fabulous Professor Gail Gillen. Professor Gillen is the director of the University of Canterbury Child Wellbeing Research Institute and Deputy Director of a Better Start National Science Challenge. She has co-led the development of the Better Start literacy approach, an evidence and strength-based approach to supporting children's early literacy development. The approach was piloted through a Better Start National Science Challenge research and is now being implemented in new entrant and Year 1 classes throughout the country. Professor Gillen's area of research focuses on understanding the relationship between spoken and written language development and, in particular, the importance of children's phonological awareness to early literacy success. Professor Gillen is a fellow of Te Aparangi, Royal Society of New Zealand and life member of the New Zealand Speech Language Therapy Association. Today, you'll hear from 3 guest speakers about data from student interviews carried out after last year's lockdown, young children's time on digital devices and the potential impact on their learning, and working positively with families to support young children's oral language. Our first speaker is Professor BRIGID McNEILL, who is a professor in the School of Teacher Education and the Child Wellbeing Research Institute at the University of Canterbury. We have next Professor Susan Morton, who is the Foundation Director of Growing Up in New Zealand, GUINZ, providing oversight, advice and expertise to the study. Then we have Tampi Bernard, who is a community activator and whānau to whānau coach within the Talking Matters team. E te whaia, e Gail, over to you.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou na mihi nui ki a koutou I tēnei rā. Ki a koe kawati mō tō tautoko I tēnei kaupapa I tēnei rā, na mihi nui ki a koe. Well, kia ora everyone. Fabulous to have you join our webinar this afternoon. We've got well over 300 joined and that clock is ticking over as more are joining, so welcome. And a great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of our director of our Better Start National Science Challenge, Professor Wayne Cutfield, as well as my fellow Deputy Director, Professor Barry Taylor, to extend a warm welcome to you to our webinar today for the Better Start National Science Challenge. It's fantastic to have so many of you on today, and just a shout out and welcome to our community leaders and researchers who are joining us, to the many practitioners from across the disciplines of education and health, to our speech language therapy colleagues, welcome. Also to parents and whānau who are joining us today. It's really great that you've taken some time out to listen to our research and to our comments today. And just a special shout out to our Better Start Literacy Approach teachers and literacy specialists, whom I know many of you are joining today. The mahi that you've been implementing in your classrooms on children's reading and writing today originated from our Better Start National Science Challenge research here. So it's great to connect you with our Better Start whānau. So let's turn to our topic for today, rethinking screen time and the impact of COVID-19 on children's learning. Wow, this is just such an important kaupapa for us to reflect on. Here's a staggering statistic for you to think about. 91% of tamariki around the world have been impacted by school closures as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So just about every child in the world has had some impact. And the international research that's been done to date does throw a spotlight on some of the negative impacts that these lockdowns and absence from school during these periods can have on our children's learning. And I've put in the chat further up, I've put in a reference there for you of a really recent systematic analysis of several studies that looked at the impact of lockdown on children's learning from particularly from Asian and European countries. And what this found was that over 30% of children had increased risk and increased features of anxiety, of depression, of irritability, of disturbed sleep, of attention difficulties, disengagement from learning during those lockdown periods where they're absent from school. So we know that this can have really quite a negative impact. And of course, we also know that during this time, our digital devices are our lifeline, aren't they? They're really how we're connecting with friends, how children are learning, how we're working. And so we've had probably our screen time has skyrocketed during these lockdown periods, well and truly beyond what we would normally do and what might be recommended for our health and our well-being. And for some young people, maybe during this lockdown period, they've developed different habits of how they've used devices that might persist even when they re-engage with learning in school. So we've got to think about how all this might be impacting their learning. So today we want to turn to our New Zealand context. And you're in for a treat because we've got some great data, some great speakers for you today. And we're going to start thinking about some of our older children at intermediate age and their experiences during our first lockdown and how they were using devices and thinking about devices. And then we're going to move down into the younger age group and a fantastic opportunity to hear about some of our data from the Growing Up in New Zealand study, and then to thinking about our infants and our little toddlers and their screen time, but also their oral language use and how we're really supporting those things that sometimes screen time can take away from. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you now to Professor BRIGID McNEILL. Great pleasure to have you on, BRIGID. Kia ora.
Oh, kia ora, Gal, and kia ora koutou to everybody online. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Gal. I feel like you've done a lot of my work for me as I'm setting the scene for the current study that I'll be looking at, where we've really been focusing on talking to our 11 to 13-year-olds in Ototahi, Christchurch, about their lockdown experiences from our initial lockdown period in 2020, which I'm sure feels like a little bit of time away for everyone at the moment. But just really to add a little to Gail's context, as you well imagine, there's been an absolute explosion of research and literature focused around factors that might well impact children's wellbeing during lockdowns. There's been a couple of studies or reviews that have drawn across the multitude of research that has come out, looking at really those primary factors that can impact children's wellbeing during lockdowns, either positively or negatively. So you can see the 4 features that are written down in that first bullet point of mine, and you can see quite high up on that list, as we're talking about today, is that quality of home learning, which is primarily facilitated at least via blended and home learning and digital learning, is one of those primary factors that can influence children either positively or negatively during their lockdown experience. What these kind of international reviews that draw across multiple contexts, what they can hide a little bit is, as you can well imagine, children's experience, depending on where they are geographically and how long a lockdown has been going on, for example, can mean that children from different contexts have much different impacts on their well-being. And the other aspect that's been highlighted through these reviews is that children of different age groups can actually have different factors that impact their well-being differently. So that's why I think it's so awesome that today we've got that perspective on a number of groups of age groups in the webinar today. The other aspect I'd like to highlight is that primarily within the literature, we've used parental report to think about those influences on children's lockdown. So that's why it was absolutely wonderful last year. Our own New Zealand's Office of Children's Commissioner conducted a report where they actually sought responses from children in Aotearoa, New Zealand, about their experiences during lockdown. It was a written survey, and it comprised quite a large age range from 9 to 18 years, with most of the respondents being of high school age. But when our children answered and our rangatahi answered, the things that they valued most about lockdown was time with whānau and autonomy over their schooling timetable, not being told when to get up, basically, in what order to do things. The challenges, as you can well imagine, missing friends and online learning. So for the study that I'm going to be focusing in on today, we really wanted to build on that report by looking in at one particular age group, intermediate age children, aged 11 to 13 years, from one school, using an interview format that really allowed us to dig into a little more depth about students' experiences during lockdown last year. So we had 139 students from a Decile 7 school here in Christchurch, which comprised almost 60% of students at that school. And as I said before, conducting those semi-structured interviews to delve into their experience. So what I'll be focusing on in my short presentation today is that first question again. What were students' negative and positive experiences during that initial lockdown, and really honing in on what they thought about their online or home learning and device or screen time. So in response to that first question around those primary things about what were participants' positive experiences of lockdown, we can see here that there were three primary themes that really came through in terms of what those students liked or loved about lockdown. And sweeping in first position was really sleeping in. And so that was the not getting dragged out of the house. I have a 12-year-old myself, so I can imagine that the mornings might have been a little easier than normal when children were allowed to sleep in. But coming in at 35% when we included screen time and online chat time is that our students felt very positive that they were allowed more screen time during lockdown, and also, again, more time with family. And when we dug into what type of screen time, it was over, as you can imagine, it wasn't so much the educational screen time that our 11 to 13-year-olds were really fussed on. It was tools like Roblox, YouTube, and Fortnite that our students were feeling really positive about having more time online for. When we dug into, well, we didn't have many students say that one of the positive experiences about lockdown was home or online learning, but when we probed a little into, well, was there anything that you enjoyed about being able to learn from home? Again, those positive comments weren't so much to the use related to the use of digital technology in regards to schooling, but they were based around, again, children feeling really positive about their ability to structure their day. So you can see some of our quotes here, first in the blue one from a girl aged 12 years. You got to do your schoolwork in the order you wanted. You could put as much time into something as you wanted. If there was a piece of writing that you really wanted to do, you didn't have to pack up and then just leave it alone and not finish it. So lots of comments around that. No one being rushed to move on to the next task if students didn't feel like they were quite finished with, or if we have some very efficient workers like our student over in the orange on the right, boy aged 11 years, if he could just work really hard and get through his work, then he felt like he had the rest of the day to focus on what he wanted to focus on. So they were the positive features about home learning that came through from those interviews. In terms of negative experiences about lockdown, there were really three key primary themes that stood out from the rest. And I think we can all relate to the first one, missing friends, missing those people that were outside of your bubble that you usually get to interact with. And over half of respondents noted that that was the most negative aspect of lockdown. I'm sure all parents can relate to this one. Students felt bored during lockdown. Obviously, the activities that they could engage in were greatly limited. But coming in quite high on the list, one of the negative aspects of lockdown was online schooling. So we were quite keen to dig into that a little bit more. So when we think into I've got some quotes here that really illustrate some of those negative aspects of home or online learning according to our respondents. So some of the negative aspects about home or online learning were related to access to devices or access to a quiet space to be able to be engaged in that online learning. So we can see in the center of the screen, a boy 11 years, well, I've got 2 sisters and a brother, and it was hard to find a quiet place where they weren't annoying me. And we also had to share a device, so I never had one when I needed it. And other aspects like children not having devices at all, or intermittent access to internet, or even devices or Google Classroom or what was being used glitching a lot. So that was one of the common themes that came out. Another really common theme about difficulties with home or online learning, apart from that missing the social aspect that we've already talked about, was actually students really missing that interactive nature of seeking feedback from their teacher. So for example, our boy, 13 years, I didn't know if what I was doing was right or wrong. So basically, a lot of students saying that they were completing work and they may have got feedback, you know, that was a bit more delayed than if they were in the classroom, so not having help in the moment. A lot of comments from our students regarding maths at this age and finding it hard to seek that support from parents. So for example, well, learning was a bit hard, like long division. I didn't really understand it. The teacher tried to explain it, but I still didn't get it. It's easier to explain to me, not on text. So again, easier to get that feedback in real life. And other comments around, I couldn't really get help in the moment when I needed it. So really what I'd like to do in this final slide of mine is start drawing together what some of these amazing themes were from our 11 to 13-year-old students with what we know from the broader evidence about the impact of screen on language development and learning. So the first thing that comes to mind when we're saying, well, quality home learning or quality online learning is really important. Well, actually, what is quality home learning or quality digital learning? And some of the things that come really through from the evidence and the literature is just what our students have been telling us in those interviews. Quality digital learning is interactive. So there was a study there, and I'm probably going to get this pronunciation very incorrect, an Italian study done by Mangavacci and colleagues in 2021. Apologies to anyone that knows Italian online today, which showed that when online learning included an additive amount of interactive Zoom sessions, for example, where students were able to get feedback in the moment, either from a teacher or from a peer, the amount of those sessions per week were associated not only with higher quality learning, but also higher quality satisfaction from students engaged in that home learning. Another theme, obviously, that comes through, it's very hard to have quality digital learning when we have inequitable access to either internet or digital devices, just what our students have been telling us, and also support for parents so they feel like they can give that support in the home learning context. And that could be support in terms of how to explain something, but it also needs to be thought about in terms of support for parents that are doing that juggle of trying to work from home and to be the teacher at the same time. And really important to use technology to maintain those social connections. I'm sure my time is coming to an end, so I just wanted to focus on 2 more things to get to springboard, because I'm really looking forward to hearing what Susan and Tampi have to say about these aspects as well. I think it's time that, you know, we need to really stop thinking of screen time as good or bad. So if we have an interactive element, so if I'm thinking about my own 12-year-old who might be building a world online in Minecraft where he's also connecting with a peer that's helping him build that in an interactive way. If we're using YouTube to help learn how to play an instrument, or using technology to seek that immediate feedback about learning that we know is really important. And the other aspect that we really know for younger children, so just linking through to Tampi's talk today, is that it's not really that screen time is inherently bad in and of itself, but it can displace other activities and other interactions that we know are incredibly valuable, like having quality conversations or having time outside in nature. So I think when we're thinking about what are current guidelines, we need to think about interactive use of technology to enhance learning, and to enhance knowledge. I call it brain building time online for my own children versus that more, I guess, inactive or passive use of screen time, and also thinking about what is a child's use of screen time replacing in terms of an activity. So that's it from me. I'll hand back to you, Gail.
Oh, kia ora, Bridget. Thanks so much. Fascinating research. Really, really enjoyed that. And we've had quite a few more join us since you started talking. So just for those that missed the introduction, Professor BRIGID McNEILL from our School of Teacher Education at the University of Canterbury and our Child Wellbeing Research Institute. Thanks very much, Bridget. It's great to see some questions coming through on the chat, and we're going to hold those to after our other two presentations, but keep those coming, and some of our presenters may answer a few as we go through as well. But let's now welcome Professor Susan Morton. Kia ora, Susan, it's great to have you. Susan is the Foundation Director of the Growing Up in New Zealand study and has really spearheaded this study for New Zealand and has a fantastic international reputation in the area of longitudinal research. Professor Morton is also the director of the University of Auckland Centre for Longitudinal Research and leads our Generation, Our Voices, Our Future study. So welcome, Susan. Wonderful to have you with us. Over to you.
Well, kia ora tātou. It's really wonderful to be here. Thank you, Gail, and thank you for the team, and thank you, Bridget, for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to take you through a very quick romp through some findings from the longitudinal study over the last 10 years. So apologies if it's quick, but happy as others are to answer questions either afterwards or during this session. So I'm going to take you backwards in time, actually, first of all, to a pre-COVID time, a time that probably some of us are finding quite difficult to imagine, particularly if you live in Auckland like I do. And all of those things that Bridget talked about with the 11 to 13-year-olds, I think some of us adults are feeling as well. That sense of boredom is definitely kicked in, and being tired of not seeing our friends and sitting on screens. But it's wonderful when we can do things like this. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of the early years, as was said by Gail before, and talk to you about some of the findings that we found about screen time in those early years from the Growing Up in New Zealand cohort. And just really briefly, the cohort is around about 7,000 children. They were recruited from before they were born in pregnancy. We recruited them by their mums, and also the partners of the mums, usually the dads, came on board as well if they wanted to from the beginning. Really importantly, this is a cohort that is generalizable to the diversity of our current families and children in that preschool period, which is incredibly important because one of the things we want to do is to understand what is shaping their well-being. And so screen time is an important part of that, and it was pre-COVID. It's become even more important, as we've heard about now. And we had a lot of interaction with these families in their first 1,000 days of life in particular. So from conception to age 2, when so many of these developmental trajectories are setting in for their well-being that is across their lifetime. And then we also followed them up just before they started school. And I'm going to focus on that today, just to kind of fill in where things were pre-COVID. So just to give you a sense of the information we collect, though, you'll see screen time sitting in the bottom corner of that diagram. We collect a multitude of information from these families every time we engage with them. And so I think one of the things that's important, and one of the things that I hope to sort of talk to you about, is how screen time fits into that whole multiplicity of other things that are going on in the children's environment. Because actually one of the things that we really do want to be able to do, as Bridget has said, is not just describe things as good or bad, and screen time has had a bad rap in the past, but actually we want to understand what can work to support children's well-being and how can screen times be used as part of that enhancement. And we really do set out to try and give messages back to parents and to educators from the information that these families share with us about how they can enhance well-being, and that includes the use of screens. So, of course, this cohort of children, as all the children that we heard about from Bridget, they are digital natives. They've been engaging with screens since really the time of their birth, and even when we saw these children a decade ago at 9 months of age, they were able to use screens in ways that I can only dream about. You know, they were swiping the screens backwards and forwards, and they knew how to turn them on and so on. So screens are part of these children's lives, and they will be part of their lives probably for the rest of their lives. And so we really want to understand then not just how much time they're spending on the screens, not just what the impact of the screen time is, but what can we do to enhance that experience and make it contribute to their well-being overall, and importantly, contribute to their ability to learn and to benefit from formal education. So we have seen throughout the data collection waves of growing up that the time on screens, even before COVID, was increasing over time. And actually the children in the cohort, by the time they were 4.5, were spending over 2 hours on screens in general. And that's probably a little bit more than our Ministry of Health recommends for safe screen time. But it is what these children were doing. And we were also very interested in collecting information, as you saw in that multiplicity of information, not just about absolute time on screens, but the type of screen time, as well as the environments that were pervading that from the families. So I want to just tell you about a few of those things now. The first thing to say is kind of obvious. You know, why are we worried about screen time? What is screen time? Why are we worried about it? Why has it got this bad rap in the past? Well, it's because we do know, unfortunately, that so much research has already pointed the fact that absolute time on screen relates to children's behaviour. And we can see that demonstrated in this very early information from the growing up cohort. So we have along the baseline here what the children were doing in their first year of life. So at 9 months of age, how much screen time were the children having? And in terms of increasing the amount of time they were having on screen, it was related to the behaviours at 2. So a year and a bit later. And actually children who were engaging in more time on screens of all types, so maybe watching the TV, because 10 years ago that was a thing, or actually using screens as well, that meant that they were more likely to be exhibiting abnormal behaviour using a tool that we use in lots of situations, the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire. So we actually saw higher odds of children who were exposed to more screens, even at 2, having differences in their behaviour. But then we said, well, is it really about the time they're spending on screens? Or is it something else that is going on for these families? Because actually these children are going to engage in screens. So what can we learn from the rest of the information that we're gaining as well? And what we did was we asked a lot about the rules and the context that pervaded the screen time for these families and these children. And we asked parents about rules they put around screen time in terms of time on screens, absolutely, but also in terms of what the children were able to view and who they viewed them with, and things like that, and time before bedtime, like did they watch screens just before they went to bed? And actually what we found was quite interesting, because this just shows you that there were rules even at 2, and in most cases those rules were adhered to. And actually what was really fascinating when we put that back into modelling was that actually it wasn't the absolute screen time that mattered. It was whether there were rules around that screen time. So if parents had rules and routines around children engaging in screen time, they could actually negate the impact on behaviour, for example, even in the first 2 years of life. So that was a message that we wanted to give back to parents, to say you can actually have control over your children's screen time, even in the early years. So rules and routines matter, not just for screens, of course, but screens is one example of that. By the time the children get to 4, as well as being associated with behaviour, we're also seeing that unfortunately absolute screen time, which is increasing, is also associated with their likelihood of being overweight or obese. And we saw 14% of the cohort were classified that way by the time they were 4.5. And children who were engaging in the most screen time were more likely to be in those overweight and obese categories than their peers who were not. Also, as we heard from BRIGID, one of the issues is that if they were on screens, they were less likely to be doing other things, less likely to be physically outside, running around, less likely to be engaged in book reading with their parents. So it was the opportunity cost as much as anything else. So again, we took a bit more of a look into this. Is it really screens that are causing this weight increase, or are there other things going on? And of course, there are multiple things that we saw for our children at 4.5. There was sleep. And the more sleep that the children got, or the more disturbed or the more routine that there was around that sleep, the less likely they were to be overweight or obese. Similarly, if they had a home environment that had more food security, so they were more advantaged, they were less likely to be overweight and obese. if they had access to healthy food, and that was defined in specific ways, they were also less likely to fit into the overweight or obese classification. And when we put that all together, as we quite often do with this information, it's clear that it's actually the coming together of all of these factors that influence the particular things that we're interested in. So screen time may get the bad rap, but actually it's not just screen time, it's all of the things that sit around that and the things that screen time replaces, and the lack of routine that actually pervades screen time and screen use that is actually leading to the problems. So actually there are things that parents can do to make that screen time safe, and that's incredibly important. So as we heard from Bridget too, obviously in the first 5 years of growing up, we asked the parents about what their children were doing, because the children, while we measured them and engaged with them, were a bit young to be answering their own questions. But one of the exciting things also just pre-COVID was we asked the children themselves about their lives at 8 as well as their parents, and we got some information directly from them about screens, but also about their general well-being and what they thought about the world. And so that was released just last year, just before COVID really kicked in for us. And what we saw there very briefly is that we saw, of course, increasing time on screens. These children were now in formal education. They were doing homework on screens. They were using screens at school, and they were using screens more to play games, to watch videos, to watch music videos, and so on. So the screen time continued to increase, and we continued in a raw way to see that absolute screen time associated with some of these negative things about behaviour and obesity and various other things going on. But of course, it's not that simple. And one of the other things that we did at 8 was to check about online safety, because of course that's one of the big concerns for these children as they start to use screens more. And the parents were worried about the safety of their children on screens, and the children were worried themselves. So 12% of them often felt concerned. This is pre-COVID, about what they were seeing. And their parents, around almost 1 in 3 or more than 1 in 4 mums, had said they had been very concerned about what the 8-year-olds were watching and engaging in. So while they were trying to control the content, there were still a lot of other things happening in the external environment, which I think as parents, we all worry about for our children and want to do something about. So that was kind of the pre-COVID world. Like Bridget, when COVID hit, as it can do in a longitudinal study, it's never anything we want to happen, but it is an opportunity to understand what has happened for this cohort. So back in May of last year, also during our first lockdown, which seems incredibly long time ago, we also undertook a bespoke survey for these children who were around about 10 at that stage. And the advantage of that in a longitudinal study is that we knew where they were a year before at 8 or 9, and we could then look at what the impact had been at 10 to 11 years. And so unfortunately, I can't tell you too much about that, other than to say that what Gail told you about depression and anxiety absolutely rings true when we look at this cohort, when you compare how they were at 8 to what had happened after this lockdown. But we will be releasing all of these reports next week, unfortunately. So if you're interested, I'd suggest you have a look at that. We're going to look at what it meant for their well-being, for their education as well, and importantly, for their mental health, which is so critically important. And also, really importantly, again, longitudinal study, there's 6,000 plus families who are still part of the study. We're now, I say in the field, but of course we are locked down up here still. So we are connecting with these children digitally to find out where they're at now, post what has been a longer lockdown probably than any of us anticipated. We want to know what the impact has been, and we will find that out in the next year or so. And we're also using the digital connections to engage with this cohort too in the Our Voices study that Gail mentioned earlier. So we're actually setting up digital platforms in a co-design process with our 12-year-olds to collect information about their well-being. Again, so we hear directly from the children, so they don't have to listen to people like me bang on about screen time and what their world is like. They tell us themselves. So I just want to wrap up there. It's a quick romp through all the things. I really want to acknowledge all of those families and the children who share their stories with us, that allow us to find these things, to take that information back and to hopefully make things better for all of them and for all the families in New Zealand. And really acknowledge my team, particularly Liz Peterson and Maria Corkin, who've done so much of this work in PhD studies and so on, and contributed to this area. So thanks for listening. I hope that's been a quick run through, but given you some food for thought.
Oh, kia ora, Susan. Fantastic, really interesting data. And you've got us all on the edge of our seats waiting for this report, because as you were talking us through that, I was thinking, oh, I wonder if they're going to follow up after lockdown now when you mentioned that. So yeah, we'll be all very interested to see that data. And thank you for your leadership in ensuring that we do hear our children's voices in this space, because it's just so important. So kia ora. And now to Tammy Bernard. Wonderful to have you join us, Tammy. Tammy is a community activator and a whānau to whānau coach with the wonderful Talking Matters team. And Tammy is a father of 4 and is really passionate about the importance of quality communication for young children, particularly for babies and toddlers. So we move right down in the age group now. And he's really driven by the need for children to have equal opportunities in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So thank you very much, Tammy, for joining us, and I'll pass the screen over to you. Kia ora.
Thank you very much, Gail and team. It's really lovely to be here, and thanks for having me. Tālofa lava, ma lolo sui fua moa malangi mama. Kauaio, my name's Tammy. My parents are from Samoa, but I was born and bred here in Auckland, New Zealand. I'm a proud father of 4 kids, aged between 3 and 19. And this photo that I share with you now is a photo of my wife, Te Wakahuia, and our son, Hawaii, is our youngest boy. I became a first-time stay-at-home dad when Hawaii was born. And although we had 3 kids before him, it was a really special time for me to connect and bond with them. And he taught me a lot. In 2019, Hawaii and I took part in Talking Matters to tamariki in our local community. And this is when I really realized the importance of my role as a father, and also learning about the power of language and development in the first 1,000 days. This experience was life-changing. I became a whānau coach for the kaupapa because I was so involved and mesmerized by the brain science and what I could do. And now I'm currently a community activator where I help educators and whānau, just like myself. I'm here today to talk to you about working positively with families to support children's language development during lockdown with a Pasifika lens. So to open my talanoa today, I'd like to share this alanga upu, a proverb, with you there on the screen. And the proverb speaks to me. So it says, "Pu te roto e whale, manuia le ano whale." And for me, this means to strengthen the foundation of your family for all to thrive. It's very important for me and my whānau. Babies are born, bit of delay there in the slide, sorry. So babies are born hardwired to learn, and they can learn any language that they're exposed to. So from the moment they are born, their brain is wiring and firing at lightning speed. So they're learning to attach meaning to words, and 80% of their brain is fully developed by the age of 3. So the first 1,000 days of life is the most important time for learning and responsive communication. Talking grows brains, so we all need to get talking to our babies. I mean, it's just that simple. Children are shaped from their environment, and a language-rich environment holds the languages of family, community, cultural diversity, inclusiveness. It's a safe space where you can see and hear yourself represented, celebrated and acknowledged for who you are and where you're from. So Talking Matters' vision is to build language-rich environments with caring adults so that children can thrive as thinkers, talkers and readers, and set them up for life. The children that start ahead, stay ahead. What are the language challenges that parents and children are faced with during lockdown? Parents will say that the biggest challenge in lockdown is trying to balance work life and home life. Working from home, teaching from home, parenting from home. It's a lot to juggle. As a parent during lockdown, you're constantly making compromises between productivity and connectivity, and productive and trying to work from home while staying physically, mentally connected with your children. It's a real struggle. got to balance your attention between your work and your family life, and especially when you've got young toddlers and young kids, they need 24-hour kind of clock attention. It can be a real emotional roller coaster for whānau, so especially the parents. When you're feeling like you're good enough, you're unavailable to your kids for their needs, and you're feeling guilty when you can't focus on your own mahi. Sort of weighs on you. So in the beginning of lockdown, son Hawaii was often left on his own. So his world was rocked and flipped upside down. I mean, he was used to going to kohanga, playing and exploring with his friends, having fun, surrounded by reo with his kaiko, and even sharing the reo with kids his age. And now all of us are at home on our computers, working from home, schooling from behind doors, surrounded by silence. During the second lockdown, however, we realized the challenge wasn't about the lack of language around him. The real challenge was the quality of language around him. Our toddlers are so clever and capable, always listening. The language we use around them is really important. In lockdown, Hawaii developed a fear of going outdoors. We'd take him out for walks and he'd stressed out. He'd just want to go straight back home, worried about all of our safety. It was really out of character, and it was a real eye-opener for us. So we realized the language we used around him played a huge part in his new outdoor anxiety. When we really thought about it, like, he was hearing negative words, like kohanga is closed. You know, we can't go to the playground. It's not safe. Or we're not allowed to go to Nana and Papa's house. We can't see your friends. You know, we're in lockdown. We have to stay home. So these words can be really scary for our little ones. What are the lockdown impacts on toddlers and language development for PI families? There are a number of cultural impacts. Ainga, which is huge. You know, we're family-oriented people, so we're always together all the time. We naturally greet each other with a hug and a kiss, and we need that physical connection. In Samoa, you know, we have open whale with no walls. You're never alone. Parents are never alone. There's always support. The village raises the family, helps to raise the children. Even in death, our ainga are buried beside the house where we can stay connected forever. Come across across to New Zealand, and we live with immediate and extended families and homes. And it's not uncommon to see a lot of us clumped in there and staying together. You know, we share Sunday lunch with tōnai, and we go to church and play sports together. Lockdown is a foreign word for Pasifika whānau, so we need our family and community connection. You know, it's when it's taken from us, we're really lost. So when we're isolated from our family and communities, it affects our heart language. So I'm in a biracial marriage. My kids hear and speak Samoan, Māori, and Palangi. Here in New Zealand and in Auckland, we live in a Palangi world. So my family, we're in Samoan world. So when my kids go across to Nana and Papa's house, fully immersed in Samoan, you know, the culture, the wha Samoan. And at home, it's my role to teach them the Samoan, to teach them the responsibilities of being Samoan. And it's hard work, and I need to work at it, but I need to give this to them. Hawaii also goes to kohanga reo, where he's immersed every day in te reo Māori, in tikanga Māori. Lockdown, when he's not at kohanga, now his mum has to work extra hard speaking Māori to him. So in a predominantly Palangian world, in a multilingual whale, you know, it's pretty challenging. During lockdowns, Hawaii has been separated from the Samoan and Māori worlds and his heart languages for over 4 months. So that's over 10% of his 3-year-old brain's development. And that kind of weighs on us when we think about that. Oh, mate. what am I, sorry. So how can we as parents support our children's oral language development during lockdown? Well, we can be intentional, see the opportunities to grow their language. You know, when you're cooking, get them to help, get them to jump up on a chair and describe what you're doing, throwing ingredients in there and smell the aromas and get them to taste things. Get outside, you know, be one with nature. Tune into the insects or the birds that fly around, you know, the weather. We love doing that. Make the effort to speak juicy words to extend their language and vocabulary, and also to grow their heart language. We use juicy words with Hawaiki at home, like vehicle instead of car, excavator instead of and the other day he told me how incredibly intelligent I was, and I made a big deal about that, and he asked me to lower my volume. So just those kind of words to me, you know, almost floored me. As well as speaking to him in heart language and his heart languages, we also encourage him to choose which language he wishes to use. So for every meal, Hawaiki chooses to bless his food in Samoan, Maori, or English. It's up to him. And we also need to be attuned. I'm having the, sorry. You also need to be attuned. Pay attention and be present. Get curious about your child and follow their lead. Ask them for their thoughts, and some of their answers might surprise you. Show them that they're important. Get down to their level and be with them. Invite yourself into a space where they accept you, and, you know, make them the teacher. When our son does puzzles, he actually teaches us things. He's showing us how he can identify shapes and colors and where things meet. And it's really lovely to see him grow like that. We talk about that. Being emotionally attuned helps babies' language to flourish. So when they feel safe and attuned emotionally, they will grow. 3, be flexible. You know, ease up and find the balance. Screen time has its place. Talking Matters, we are non-judgmental about screen time. It's about finding what works in lockdown. You know, it's finding the balance. And for us, finding the balance really helps. With Hawaiki and our kids, we tune into things that he's interested in. We all get busy. We need to do the cooking. One might be showering with the parents and there's no one around. So what do? We put on shows that he can relate to. We put on Animal Planet, where we can ask him questions as we're cooking. I'm yelling out to him what animal's on there now, and he can answer to me in any 3 languages, which is great. And it's that kind of interaction that we share. So there is a time for screen time, and when you're busy, you know, it's okay. It really helps. Be real and adaptable. As parents in lockdown, we need to make time to just hug and be. So silly and have fun. That really grows their brains. That stimulation is what they need, especially in lockdown. And there's no need to be perfect. It's hard to juggle the demands of being a good parent in lockdown. And we all make mistakes, and that's fine, just as long as we're all learning from them. This is a foreign situation for everybody, you know, the COVID world. And we're all adapting to it, so don't be too hard on yourself. The whole whānau has a role, so play for these skills and share the load. In our whale, we have kids who have their own way of gifting language to Hawaiki, and so what we see is Naz, the older brother, he loves to read books to Hawaiki. So Hawaiki loves the intonation of his voice and the different characters that Naz seems to take on. It's really captivating. Selena, she takes a lot of phone videos, and she can have so much rich talanoa and laughter with her brother, talking about memories and pointing out whānau. And Hawaiki asks questions, and they can talk about that. There's memories that are shared too, that he remembers things and she doesn't.
Kia ora, Tampi, really a powerful kōrero, and it's getting a lot of response from our listeners online. We're having some comments come in. People are literally juggling babies and blowing bubbles on their knees as they listen to your beautiful kōrero. So I'll give you a minute just to wrap that kōrero up, and then we'll open up for questions. Kia ora, Tampi.
Okay, kia ora. Yep, so, and, you know, Kayla, his younger sister, she's got a big imagination and she's closest in age to him. So, you know, they build blanket forts, pretend to space travel, and they do all that sort of thing to connect. So the communication and non-verbal communication between them speaks volumes. So there are many different challenges for us as parents during lockdown, physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, and culturally. We need to be kind to ourselves, be real about the here and now, and do everything with love and respect for our tamariki. We can all help create a positive language-rich environment for our tamariki to grow with language, and they will grow and thrive. Well, thank you. That's it from me. Thanks for listening. I'll be closing with that Samoan proverb that you see right there, which reads, "O whānau o manu, e whawhanga I whaunga la au, o whānau o tangata I whaunga I upu." So birds are nourished with food, children are nourished with words. So talking matters. So thanks for that. Sorry for going over time. Kia ora.
No, not at all, Tampe. It was
Laila.
fantastic kōrero, and really, really powerful to hear your perspective and advice for parents and whānau and those working with our young tamariki, and just taking care of ourselves and the pressures that you know, we're all facing, particularly up in Auckland with continued lockdown. So it's just really, really powerful. So kia ora, everyone. Thank you to our wonderful presenters. We'll open up now for questions so that we've had quite a few questions come in through the chat and on Q&A. And I might start off with one, and Kawiti will also help me field some of the questions. But one first for you, Bridget. First of all, acknowledging your wonderful presentation, but also just wondering if the children's experiences during lockdown for our year 7 and 8 students depended on how the instructional materials were delivered in terms of their learning online during that remote learning, including maybe some of the platforms used. So just thinking about the ways their learning was being delivered and what might have, how that might have impacted their learning. Kia ora, Bridget.
Kia ora, thank you so much. We only have a little bit of insight from the students themselves rather than the teachers about the explicit nature of the exact online learning that was happening. What we do know is that if we can all, and I think Susan made the comment, this feels like a long time ago, but if we do cast our mind back to 2020, our teachers were scrambling to think of how to best deliver in this format. So even across the weeks, how that online learning was delivered changed quite a bit. And so there was a mix. There was a mix of using a few kind of online video conference kind of aspects, and others were around delivering work to students that they either completed online or via paper where they could take a photo and resubmit back. And students differed in their views about what they liked. Where we had really strong views about not liking learning from home, it wasn't so much around being on a screen, it was whether there was access to a screen, whether the screen worked well, whether they could get good feedback from a teacher in a timely way, and whether they could still connect with their peers. From the students' perspective, that was more important than themes coming around about the particular type of online learning that was used.
Oh, kia ora. And quite a few questions coming in, thinking about that study, of course, was done during the first lockdown. Quite a different situation now, particularly in Auckland with such an extended period of time. But also we've moved on, and our teaching talents of being online and how to engage children online has also been developing, as our wonderful teachers around the country just put in so much mahi and hard work into ensuring a really good experience. But Susan, your study that's going to come out will be a great insight into Auckland children's perspectives, because growing up in New Zealand study has predominantly been around children in Auckland. But just there was a question related to some of those psychological and behavioural aspects that you're picking up even at such a young age, where they have heavy screen time use. So just wanting to hear a bit more about how it does affect young children's behaviour and maybe their well-being.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think screen time, I guess the first thing to say is it's not just screens. I mean, we're seeing reflected, I guess, the complexity of environments in a measure of screen time. So I don't want this to sort of sound like it's all about screens, but obviously screens are a big part of these children's lives. So the more complex, more disadvantaged environments that children find themselves in, the more likely they are to go on to have poorer well-being before they start school, to be less ready for school, to have less vocabulary, to have less early literacy, to have, to lack that rich language that Tampi is so wonderfully talked to us about in terms of people's imaginations. And and I think we have been really concerned about that, and screens have often sort of borne the brunt of being the problem there. And one of the things I think that was interesting, perhaps to slightly parallel some of that question, but to think about it, is that we thought probably that screen times might be used by busier parents, by parents who lacked time, lacked control over their own lives. And actually, one of the things that we found is that's not the case. So some parents, despite the struggles, are doing the most amazing job with their children in terms of speaking to them, making their worlds rich and exciting, and keeping their aspirations and dreams alive despite the challenges that are going on. But I think we are concerned in Auckland, as well as across the country, about the duration of this particular lockdown, the impact it's going to have differentially on groups of children, I think, particularly for those children that Bridget talked about somewhat too, and Tampi mentioned as well, the children who are already struggling in families that are stretched beyond their capacity to become teachers and workers from home and parents, and they all want to be great parents, but now they have to be everything and they're already stretched. And so we're really, really worried about the impact that is going to have in terms of widening some of the gaps that we were seeing even before lockdown, and that this period of lockdown, with and without the screen time that's required, is actually going to exacerbate some of those issues that we're seeing for some of our children who were already falling behind their peers, and that's unacceptable in New Zealand. We all want to do something about that, but unfortunately, I think what we're going to see as we follow these children up at 12, as we look at the findings that we're going to get, is that the mental health and the physical health of children will be differentially impacted by the environments around them, by their families' resources and capacity to overcome really a lot of the things that have been thrust upon them. And I think that's the challenge. How do we recover from that? How do we create trajectories of hope for all of our children?
Yeah, certainly some challenges ahead of us. And just a question for you, Tampi, just around how do you support in your whānau context to limit young children's screen time while balancing your work-life balance and connecting with whānau and all of those things? So about that balance, which is really tough during lockdown periods, but also in general in our busy lives. So just a question about balance for children and restricting screen time.
Yeah, kia ora for the question. It's simply just not being too hard, and we're in difficult times right now. So what we try and do is provide our child with something educational, something that he's into. He loves dinosaurs. I mean, we're seeing his language grow. He won't just say dinosaurs; he will say pterodactyl or plesiosaurus, brontosaurus. I mean, his language is stretching and growing, and we just moderate the things that he does. He tells us when he's had enough. He'll want to switch to something else, so we follow his lead. So, it's those things when you are busy, it's not going to kill you to turn something on, but don't let the TV be the babysitter, of course. Make it intentional. Think about what the content that you're sharing. We share cultural things. We play some Māori things off YouTube, waiata. We stop things, we get him to say things back in te reo. He's telling us and describing what's on the screen. We make it interactive, we make it interesting. And of course, we take breaks from that when we can. But it does have its time and place, and we can't judge parents and everybody for, especially in these hard times. It does have its place, and especially in my household, we're all working behind closed doors. So, even just to have them sit in front of the TV and talking about whatever's playing is really good and chill. So, yeah. That's the
Oh,
message.
kia ora. Well, it's great to know that we've got you and your team and Talking Matters out there supporting our whānau with these really important aspects of our young children's lives. Well, thank you to our panellists. I'll pass over to Kawiti in a moment just to wrap up the session and tell you what's coming up on the Better Start National Science Challenge next webinar. But a huge thank you to our three panellists today. Your research, your mahi, your insights has really been inspirational, highlighting some of the challenges we've got ahead for us, but giving us hope, because the great mahi that you're doing is really making a difference for our communities and helping inform us and inform policy and where we need to put our efforts and our research energy in the future. So kia ora, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Thank you to everyone who's listening online, been wonderful audience through your participation, and pass to Kawiti to close our session. Kia ora.
Tēnā tātou katoa, kia ora Gail, and just echoing those sentiments, big mihi to our panellists and all our attendees. We hope you can join us next time, and yeah, we'll just finish off with a karakia and then say our goodbyes. Nā reira, kia inoi tātou, unuhia, 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 te uru tapu nui, kia wātea, kia māma, te ngākau, te hinengaro, te tinana, te wairua i te rataka tū, koi ara e rongo whakairia ki runga, tūturu whakamaua kia tīna, haumie, huie, tai.
Tai kie, kia ora.
Kia ora everybody. Until next time. Ka kite.